Great. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session where we'll talk about accessing public appointments, finding out a little bit more about what they are and how disabled people can get involved. My name is Emma Scott, and I am the Operations Manager at Disability Equality Scotland. And I'm joined today by my colleagues Morven, Ian, and James, who will be helping to facilitate today's session. Let me explain briefly how the session will run and how you can interact with us. So today's webinar is a little bit different to ones we've hosted before. Today we are in a meeting format, and that means that you have the choice to have your camera on or off, as well as your microphone. But could I ask that everyone keeps themselves on mute unless you are invited to speak? This helps us cut down on any background noise and distractions. Now, you can choose to have your camera on or off, but again, can I ask that if you are speaking, please do have your camera on, as this helps us in terms of inclusive communication. We do have some BSL users with us today, and so it's useful to be able to see the speakers. But also later when we move into our small discussion groups, it's useful to have the camera on so it's easier to interact as part of the discussion. What would also help is that the name on display on your screen is the name that you registered under so that we can identify you, and real names are always preferable if that's okay. I'll soon hand over to our panelists who will give a short introduction to accessing public appointments. We're joined today by Robert Boyter from the Public Appointments team at the Scottish Government, and Lesley Craig, who is a disabled person currently holding a public appointment, and we'll hear from them in just a moment. At any time today during the webinar, you will have the opportunity to submit your questions to Robert and Lesley. To do that, you can type your question into the chat box in the bottom control panel, and as time allows, we'll try and get to as many questions as we can. If you'd prefer, you can ask the panelist a question directly, and just type so in the chat and we'll be able to select you to speak, at which point you'll have to unmute yourself so that we can hear you. If you're having any technical difficulties with Zoom, any problems, then again, type your problem into the chat box and James will do his best to try and resolve that for you. Now, as I mentioned, we've got some BSL interpreters with us today, and we also have closed captions available. Now, these can be accessed via the closed captions button at the bottom of your screen, or you might also find them under the More button or the 3 dots, depending on your platform. You can select Show Subtitle, and then you'll be able to view the captions directly and change the size, etc., to your needs. We'll also be recording today's webinar, and we'll be able to share the link with those who can't make it. If you don't want to be recorded, then please just keep your camera off. Also, after today's event, we've got a very short evaluation survey that we'll send out, and please do take the time to give us your feedback, as it helps us to improve for the next time round. So if I can just check, does everybody hear me okay? If you give me a little thumbs up and we can get started, great. Good. I just want to very briefly set today in context. We're here to talk about public appointments, and Robert will very much give us more detail on this. But as an introduction, a public appointment is when a Scottish Government minister appoints someone to the board of a public body. Now, public bodies seek to promote, deliver, fund and scrutinise public services, or they provide impartial expert advice to ministers, to the Parliament and to other organisations that deliver public services. Now, statistics show us that disabled people are significantly underrepresented on public boards in Scotland. We know about 20% of the Scottish population currently identifies as disabled, but only around 7% of all current public body board appointees identify as disabled. So there's a bit of a discrepancy. And in response, the Scottish Government is trying to make these boards more representative of the wider population of Scotland. So in advance of today's meeting, we used our weekly poll to ask our members whether they would consider applying for a public appointment. We heard from nearly 300 people, and 92% told us that yes, they would be really like to be considering a public appointment. So that was really useful feedback for us ahead of today's discussion. So today's webinar will focus on what measures can be introduced to make public appointments more accessible and inclusive. And we'll have the opportunity to discuss things like the accessibility of the application process, any perceived financial barriers, and what reasonable adjustments could be made to allow disabled people to participate. So to kick off, first of all, I'll introduce you to Robert Boyter, who is the business manager from the public appointments team at the Scottish Government. And Robert will start our session. Robert, over to you.
Thank you for that. You talked about my first part of my presentation. So I say I work in the public appointments team and here to talk about public appointments. I'll just do a quick overview of what a public appointment is, and then I'll move on to what everybody will want to know about how you actually physically apply for a public appointment, which and then yeah, and then you'll hear from Marcella, who will actually tell you a perspective of actually being a public body board. So if yes,
so see that, okay.
Number two. So basically, I don't want to read everything on the slide. So basically, a public body is at arm's length from ministers. As Emma let you know earlier, it's a public appointment is made on behalf of Scottish ministers. So we have public bodies such as NHS bodies, national galleries, the arts sector. They're all public bodies. So they're appointed by ministers to offer expertise within a specific field, and they work to strict criteria. Can I have the next slide, Emma, please? The main function of the board is basically, in a nutshell, is to provide leadership in the organisation, because to ensure that the organisation delivers on what it's actually set up to do. So the bottom point, to hold the chief executive and management team to account, that's basically what the key function of the board is, as well as the financial stewardship and making sure that they provide to put the policies and priorities of ministers. Can I have the next one, please, Emma? Right, so the delivery, so it's ministers are at the top, so ministers make the appointment, then each body has a chair, then there's the board, and then there's the executive team, so that's the chief executive and the directors of the organisation. And from that, in the yellow bit, the outcomes is to ensure that they achieve the outcomes of what the body is set up to do. The next one, please. Right, I thought it'd be good to give you some key figures. Emma's already said to you. So currently, 58 people, 7.9% of people who hold a public appointment have a declared disability. We are also finding, interestingly, that there's an increased number who apply for a public appointment and are appointed to choose but prefer not to say. So that is increasing as the age range of people we appoint to public appointments is increasing. So that's an interesting dynamic we have noted. It's currently about 4.5% of people who hold a public appointment have chosen the prefer not to say option. Interestingly, in 2020, we recruited 71 people and received 1,301 applications, and in 2020 we actually increased the number of the disabled people we appointed and invited to interview. So that's quite an interesting one, because normally we get about 3,000 applications in any one year, and we usually make about usually between 120 to 130 appointments in any one year. So that was quite interesting. And you may have heard we have over 50%, it's 52% of people who hold public appointments are women at the moment. Can I have the next slide, please? The Ethical Standards Commissioner, I bring this in because all the public appointments that we do are independently regulated by the Ethical Standards Commissioner. Basically, what the Ethical Standards Commissioner ensures is we appoint people to the boards of public bodies based on merit, and it follows a code of practice and guidance which is laid down by Parliament, so the Ethical Standards Commissioner makes sure that we abide to those standards. Next slide, please. Briefly mention this, and this is the code of practice we work to. So merit, so we make sure that the board meets the specific needs at the time. Integrity, that the process is open, fair and transparent. And diversity and equality, representative of the people of Scotland. And that is why we're here to talk to you today as well. And also there's a gender representation of Public Boards Scotland Act. Basically, that's to ensure that the boards maintain the 50% and above for women being on the boards of public bodies. Can I have the next slide, Emma? I include this slide. So this is a slide that we did at an event. It's a seesaw. So in the middle is the non-executive, and then one side is about too involved and not enough involved. So basically the idea of a slide is about getting as a board member, getting the right balance, and that you remain apart from the operational aspect of the organisation, not getting too involved, being impartial to the process. So that's the slide. Next one, the applying for a public appointment. That's what everybody's here to find out about. So basically, a passion for the issue, professional development, building your own skill sets, developing your network, a sense of public service. So what does this mean? Basically, we find that people apply for public appointments because they're passionate about a particular issue, like about healthcare inequalities, for example. So that's why some people want to be on health boards, to try and change the systems. You're interested in a particular topic, like within the arts and culture. So there's a vacancy. So it fits within your level of interest, or fits within your skill set that you've got. All of these are reasons why a lot of people apply for a public appointment. Can you go to the public next one? Right, so what's involved? All the adverts for public appointments are on the Appointed for Scotland website, and it involves an application. So one of the things within one of the workshops later on is how can we make changes to the application process, because we are keen to do it, because it is online. However, there are alternative formats available for appointments. You just need to ask. And so within the application, there'll be a covering note, which will be an application pack, which explains everything that they want to do. It's competency-based STAR, which I will explain later on what it means. But as I say, it's an application. So tips for a successful application: avoid jargon and keeping it relevant. What we hear a lot is you've got a word limit. It's usually between 300 to 400 words to say what your experience is for each of the criteria. What they're wanting to know is what you have done, what difference you've made, why you made it, and how you have brought about change, for example. So you need to give specific examples. You need to say what you have done as in I, not as in a group, as in what we have done. This is something we get a lot from board chairs. People just give a big list of things about this is what they did, this is what happened, but they've not said what they've done. And so therefore, because it's all scored, so they go from number one to number one means you've not answered the question, you're not given any evidence. 3 to 5, you've been exceptional, you've showed us a lot. So if you just do a list of things and you don't give specific examples saying what you've done, what difference you've made, well, they can't shortlist you. Number 2. So as I say, so when you get selected to go for an interview, which you will be asked either You will get a board paper or a case study, which you will get in advance, or you may be or some of them will get you to do something on the day. It'll be an interview. At the moment, all interviews are taking place remotely by Zoom or Microsoft Teams at the moment. And what we'll be looking at the interview is they will be going over your application, and they'll be asking you questions, and the questions that they're looking to is getting to the core skills that you've got. Some NHS boards, usually for chair roles, they do something called psychometric testing. And what we're doing from that is looking to see if a person fits. It's called a fit and proper test. And so that will be done in advance. And above all, it's based on merit. So therefore, the skills that you have demonstrated on your application, the skills you have demonstrated at the interview, that's what will be tested on. Next slide. As I say, it's a competency-based process, which is quite alien, very much public sector, and not very well used, not used in the private sector. It's called STAR. So basically, S is situation, as in when you're doing an answer, you outline what the situation was. T is the task, is this is what the problem was, and this is what I was asked, what we were looking at, this is what we were trying to follow, or trying to make improvements, for example. A is the action. This is what I did. This is why I did it. This is what we hope to achieve. R, the result. This is as a result of doing this. This is what happened. And what they're looking for as well is R, the reflection, as this is what the task was. This is what we did. This is what happened. But with hindsight, this is what we could have done differently, or maybe this wasn't the best solution, but we then did this, we then did that. So that's what we're looking at for each of the examples. It's usually 3, possibly 4 within the application that we'll be looking for that. And you can look at this in your own time. What we've done is we've got some 3 short videos from current board members, and it's subtitles, and it actually keeps it real. So that's me, in a nutshell, and that's my contact details.
Great, thank you, Robert. We'll have time to take any questions later on, and also in part of the discussion, but I'd like to move on first of all and just introduce Lesley Craig. Lesley is a board member currently with the Mobility and Access Committee for Scotland. Lesley is also a member of the Scotland Committee of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and also the Scotland Committee representative on the Equality and Human Rights Commission Disability Advisory Committee. I hope I got that right, Lesley. That was a bit of a mouthful.
Yes.
Good. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Emma. And thank you, Robert, for giving such a good overview of the public appointment system. And I'm really pleased to be here speaking to you all today about the role of public appointees and public bodies, because I think it is really important that disabled people get involved as much as possible in public bodies, because over the years I have found that that is probably one of the best ways for disabled people to get their voices heard in government and in different bodies. So I hope you'll go away feeling as positive about this as I do. So if I can give you the 2 things that I want to say is that everybody's path to public appointments is different. So people will take their own skills and their own experience where they want to go. But before I go on and tell you a little bit about my history, the big thing that I want to say to people is that what I have learned is that people should be confident and assured about applying to be a public appointee, because in my experience, most public bodies, they want to have disabled people. They're looking for disabled people. I mean, obviously you have to be the right fit with the right experience, but actually they're looking they're looking to allow you on board. So when I move on to the interview situation, one of the things that you realise is, so sorry, Robert, the application process is hard. Gosh, my least favourite bit about the whole process is that application form online. I really don't like it. Now, I appreciate why it is as it is, but it is difficult. I would say it's time consuming and it takes a lot of nervous energy and thought. But, the big thing is, I guess it's like doing an exam. When you're filling in the paper, read the questions, answer what they're asking you. I'm as bad as anybody else for not, but it's really quite important that you you answer the questions that they're asking. So I think the second bit then is saying, if you get an interview, be confident, because actually they're looking to appoint you. And my own experience is I've struggled in some interviews, and it's a shame because I can see the interviewers trying to ask me questions, so I can answer in a way that that they can assess my competency. So I think, please don't think that people will try and keep you out. I think quite the opposite. They will be very welcoming of your application. But the other thing I want to say is, if you don't get offered an appointment, if you don't even get offered an interview, don't be disheartened, because I think that's part of the story. And certainly from my own experience, I have applied for a lot more public appointments than I have, which, I've certainly applied for a lot more than I've got. And in fact, for lots of the ones that I've applied for, I haven't even got an interview. So the reality is, but that is probably true for most applicants to public bodies, whether or not they're disabled. So I'm thinking about the skills and experience. I mean, my own history is that I think what I'd be saying is go from your own experience. So my professional background was as a solicitor and as a social worker. But then, sorry, that's my husband running the tap next door. So that was as a solicitor. But actually, Emma, could you show the photograph? The way my route into public appointments was nothing to do with law or social work. It was to do with my MS. So at the end of the day, I was diagnosed with MS. I became an active campaigner for MS. And it was through that was ultimately my road into public appointments, because I was active. I was elected to the MS Society's Board of Trustees, which gave me a lot of governance experience. But more importantly, for public appointments, it gave me a lot of experience of travelling around the UK in my wheelchair. And it was that experience and the knowledge that I learned through that really, I think, allowed me to get my first public appointment, which was for the Mobility and Access Committee of Scotland. And I haven't looked back. I've loved it. I'm just about at the end of my 2 terms, and I'm really sad, and I'm really looking forward to finding new challenges. But anyway, so things happen. So on Max, we were looking at the United Nations Convention for the Rights of Disabled Persons. And as a result of that, I was looking through the EHRC's website, and looking through the EHRC's website, I thought, oh, they were advertising for the Scotland Committee. So I thought I could do that. I care about human rights. I know about that. So that was how I moved on to that. So really, that's what I'm wanting to say. And it's all about I think the big thing is you don't need to have massive qualifications to be a public appointee, but you do need knowledge and a passion for the bodies, you know, for the bodies that you're applying for. So I hope that answer. Oh, now I forgot to say. Yes, so sorry, I have written things and now I've looked at it. So if you get an appointment, I guess the big thing to remember is that, you know, it's not all fun. Emma, and I'm sorry, Linda, because I can see you in the, oh yes, that's the fun bit of the campaigning. Oh, no, Linda, I'm sorry about this, but I think this is hilarious, this one, because meetings are serious. You can take it off now. Thank you, Emma. Meetings are serious, but actually, they're not just about turning up and saying your piece. They do involve a lot of preparation. Sometimes you have a lot of paperwork to wade through to be properly prepared for a meeting. So that's just a warning. It's not all a picnic. And the other thing that I thought I would mention is, I know there's some concerns about lots of disabled people, you know, receive benefits, things like employment support allowance. I claim employment and support allowance, and there are some concerns. Robert, I'm sure would say it's really important to speak to your local benefits office before you take up a public appointment. But I think the other thing that I want to say is that my own experience is that certainly people in my local office, and I can't speak for everybody else, but they were very, very supportive of me, and they were very, very keen that I did not have my employment support allowance removed because of the way public appointment fees, they're not like wages. You know, you might get £150 for a meeting, but then you get nothing else for 3 months. So it's really quite important that you know, that you make that argument to your local office. And certainly my local benefits office agreed with me, and agreed with me that they could, if you like, average out all my fees and my hours for the year, and then take it. So rather than, I think it's 15 hours a week and £150, but they averaged it out for a year rather than a particular week. Because some particular weeks I would have been way over, but other particular weeks I wouldn't have been. So I think that's a big thing. But mainly the message I want to give to people is be relaxed about applying for public appointments, because I honestly think they want you. If you've got the skills, they definitely want you. And that, I think, is me, but I will be happy to answer any questions later.
Great. Thank you, Marsley. That's great. And I think you've touched on a number of issues that we'll want to pick up in our discussion groups, which we'll move into in just a moment. Each group will have a facilitator who has some key questions that we want to cover with you today, but it is your opportunity to have a say and to give us your feedback. We have 30 minutes set aside for discussions, and then we'll have a very quick 10-minute comfort break. So we will meet back here at about 2:40, and then we'll hear from each of the groups, find out a little bit more about what you've talked about. And then if there are any outstanding questions, we'll have the chance to hear again from Robert and Marsley. So we'll see you back here soon. Ian, can I come to your group first? Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely, Emma.
Just a quick overview would be lovely.
Yeah, absolutely, can do. We had a really good discussion, and I agree, you know, 30 minutes flew by, felt like 15. With regards to the kind of considering taking the public appointment, I think the overarching consensus there was that the public appointment application process is currently really difficult. It's a laborious process, and that the feeling was that it's weighted towards a certain person. It's got an academic style. It's almost like you're filling in a job application form, especially with the STAR system. And it's not accessible in the sense of being accessible to the ordinary person, not necessarily even accessible to disabled people who have lots to give here. With regards to reasonable adjustment, we agreed that inclusive communication needs to be, the standard here, not the exception. People shouldn't have to ask for the information that they need, and that it should just be available without awareness, but also with awareness that Easy Read can be confusing for disabled people, or confusing for dyslexic people, and that Easy Read isn't necessarily a magic bullet here. With regards to remuneration, I think we agreed that a daily fee was easier for people to understand. It was easier to annualise it and how to spread it out across the year, so that would help with benefits, but that the advice is to just check with your local benefits office around what impact a public appointment might have on your benefit. And just lastly, on representation, there's still a stigma here around disabled people being capable of doing the work required. And I think that was the consensus in our group. And that if the benefits office sees you taking up a public appointment, they'll go, well, if you're capable of doing a public appointment, then you're capable of getting back to work. And that's the worry here. So there's a lot of anxiety, I think, that just needs to be soothed out a wee bit. And hopefully with a fact sheet, which was what was suggested as a kind of really good first start, a fact sheet being available for disabled people, that they can get all the information that they need. So that's me.
Great, thank you, and that's helpful. Marvin, can I ask you to give us an overview of your discussion?
Yeah, sure. So again, really good discussions in our group. The members in our group were 50-50 in those who have applied and been in a public appointment, and some that have applied and not been so successful. It was agreed across the group that there's obviously many benefits to being on a public board, and it's especially seen as building up really good skills for future employment. Many of the people in our group see applying for a public appointment as a route into employment, which is really good. Again, the skills that can be built up through being on a public appointment around motivation, team working, personal opinion, for example. We talked about the application process. It's quite similar to what Ian was saying around sort of I don't know if Ian mentioned this actually, it was the word count within the boxes can be.
Yeah, Robert had talked about that, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not ideal. Again, we touched on around what Robert had mentioned around even personal examples as well. We did talk about experiences, some being good, some being bad. It was mentioned that applying for NHS and being on an appointment with NHS is quite negative. There needs to be a culture change there. So there seems to be quite a lot of negativity around the NHS point of view. Also around, again, don't be afraid to say what your communication requirements are, your accessible needs are. This is about you, it's not about them. You need to sell yourself and you need to get across what you require for that post as well. And we also mentioned that why they could also involve disability organisations in the shortlisting process or even the interview process for better guidance, and something similar what Ian said around maybe a top tips. Many of these application processes will involve a guidance document of some kind, but it's around making that easier to understand and follow through the process.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think our group were very much the same. We found that actually finding the information about a public appointment can be very difficult, about knowing where to look. Some people might prefer finding information on social media, but quite a lot of information doesn't appear in the general publications that people read. So some people might go directly to an organisation which they've already identified as being one they're interested in. And so just seeing what's available on their website, but that could be a bit more potluck. Word of mouth seems to be a very effective way of sharing information about what's available. And there is perhaps, like Morgan said, more of a role for the likes of Disability Equality Scotland in sharing some of those public appointment adverts with our members and access panels. In terms of adjustments, we talked about it can be very much a barrier, a perceived barrier, in that people are they don't want to perhaps share the fact that they want or need an adjustment, because they're more likely to then be overlooked for the appointment, because they'll be seen as more hassle, more trouble, more time and effort. And so there's additional work there to do with bodies and public appointees to make sure that people understand the benefits of having a disabled people on their boards, but also that disabled people themselves have to understand the benefits and realise their own worth, in that lived experience is just as important as perhaps an academic qualification. We talked about some of the perceived barriers around travel and how that can create barriers for people physically getting to meetings. But obviously since COVID, we're now all a little bit more au fait with using Zoom and remote dialing in, so that could actually be a benefit for people. We talked about perhaps having a mentor or a support person that could almost buddy up with a disabled person to give them some support, talk them through what it's like to have a public appointment, and that could perhaps be in place from the application stage to give people that support, because the process itself, as we've discussed already, is quite hefty, particularly the application as well as the interview process. There's a lot involved, a lot of time and commitment, and perhaps a support person at that stage would be really helpful. And I think we just felt that organisations need to really understand the worth of and the value of a disabled person, and that the application process has to align with that. But I think above all, what we said to try and encourage people into these posts is to make sure that vacancies are apparent and very visible, they're also accessible, and that those reasonable adjustments are in place to make sure that people can participate. But I think we covered loads in our discussion, so well done to everybody in that short space of time. We do have around 10 minutes left with Lesley and Robert, so if anybody does have any questions, you can either pop them into the chat box or raise your hand and let me know that you're wanting to come in. I'll see if I can see everybody. But otherwise, okay. Now I can see Heather and Derek. So I'll come to Heather first of all. Do you want to ask a question? And then Derek, I'll come to you. Heather,
I'd like to ask Marshall a question. Roughly, how much? Oh, I can keep spotlight. Anyway, how much roughly could be on a public board? How much roughly? Because you mentioned earlier about time and stuff. Roughly, how much time do you need to be on a public board?
That's a really good question, Heather, because I guess one of the things that I was thinking when I was hearing people speaking is that a public appointment isn't the same as a job. So it shouldn't be seen as instead of a job. I mean, some people have I guess some people can live off public appointments and just do loads, but most people don't. So I think, and it depends on your board, but I think for my experiences that it takes up, depending on your commitment, because some people will spend time way more than they get paid fees for, and some people won't. But I think you could probably expect to spend 2 days a week on a public appointment, just all the work. The actual meetings are probably less. Meetings, I think, are normally in non-COVID times, are normally every couple of months. But as I said, there is a lot of preparation to be done for a meeting. So a 4-hour meeting will probably take 4 hours reading to prepare for it, to cover all this stuff. But the one thing that I was just going to say, it's probably really worth, when I'm saying contact the DWP, but make sure they realise this is not a job. You know, it can't be treated like a job. The hours and the money are just not like a job. So if I can say, so for a public appointment, I think generally, I think in fees, I get about £3,000, but that's a year. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not a living wage.
No.
And that's why the employment support allowance people have got to realise that they've got to, you know, average it out and treat it like a bit like a part-time job, but average it out over the year and make that argument to them. So does that answer your question, Heather?
Yeah, kind of. Thank you, Michael. Yeah.
Thanks, Marcely. I'm going to come to Derek, Todd next, and then Adele. Edwards, I can see you've got your hand up, so I'll come to you in a second. So Derek, do you want to ask your question?
Aye, I was just thinking about the equality and diversity. I mean, everything is equality and diversity these days. People are board, organisation, we're equal, we're diversity, we're inclusive. Could there not be some kind of like a fact sheet or a criteria to have like a minimum number of people who must be either disabled to join the board, because some of them, like, let's have a quota, let's try and find one disabled person out of 10 to go on the board. Should we not have a minimum, like maybe 50% of board members have a disability? Many thought that the organisation board have a criteria on the constitution. So can we not adopt that on the public appointment? And also, is there something like inclusive communication policy linked to maybe an access fund, you know, an access fund for people with disabilities that require additional support? Maybe a personal support assistant support them with preparing for the meeting, reading papers, or working with an interpreter, translating English to be there to before the meeting happen, to ensure that the person confident, because I'm sure many disabled people are feeling a bit maybe isolated or lonely, being the only disabled person on the board, feeling under the spotlight and pressure. Want to make sure that they come across very well and presented for everybody watching to see if the person is failing or making a very presentation. So how can we overcome that? Good to see you again, Robert. Been a while.
Well, are you going to answer, Robert? Or one of the things which I would have said earlier is that's what I think most public bodies, they want to appoint a disabled person because it is good. It's good for their diversity ratings. It looks good on their literature, but it's just, as you say, it's how you make it accessible for people to apply through the current system. And I think that could be, but I'll pass over to Robert to.
Good to hear from you, Derek, by the way. I was on mute. Disability criteria for boards. It's something we've been asked quite recently regarding another piece of work we did, and it's something that's been looked at the moment, but we are bound by legislation at the moment. So it is something that has been raised, and we're looking at regarding about disabled people on the board. Regarding access to work and getting specialist help, there's been an ongoing battle with the DWP colleagues, and there's a paper which Emma has got a copy of and she can forward to people, and it's got some key questions that you can, if you can answer them, to speak to your access to work advisor in the job centre to see if you can use it for a public appointment, which would include additional support that you may require. So hope that answers all your questions.
Thanks, Robert. I'm conscious of time. I want to make sure Adele gets to ask her question, so if you can answer quickly, that would be helpful. Adele, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, more observation than anything else. I love the idea of a tutor system because I think it would really support people who have had bad experiences, lack confidence, to really highlight what their abilities are. it would be great to have an option for in the application, like the lovely lady was saying, a day in the life of a delegate. So we also know what we are applying for. Or somebody who's on a public board. I'd love, if possible, if we could have a delegates list so we could reach out to each other for networking. And also when you mentioned about merit-based for boards, when you do have, you know, as you say, accessibility as far as, you know, it feels like it's a job application. It'd be nice to see more merit-based approaches that recognize the individual expertise of people that experience disability.
Absolutely.
Something I should maybe have said when I spoke, the application process is totally anonymous. The board will not see, the people doing the selection will not see the monitoring information, and very often not, they won't see the name either. So just to make you aware, it's a totally anonymous process.
Okay, thanks everybody. I'm really conscious of time. Thank you all for your time and your contributions today. We'll take all of your feedback and your discussion points and we'll put together a very short summary of today's discussion and we can share that with you along with some of the other paperwork. And as I said, after the event, you will get a short feedback survey. So please do take the time to give us your thoughts and it helps us to prepare for our next webinar. Adele mentioned there about a delegates list. We're happy to do that. If I could ask, if you do not want to share your email address, then please do let us know. Otherwise, we'll share the email address that you registered with, and we'll do that this time next week. So please do let us know within the next week, or if you don't want your email to be shared. Otherwise, just finally, a thank you to our presenters today, to Lesley and Robert, to all of our communication support from BSL and the captioner girls. Thank you so much. To our facilitators and also to all of you for coming along and giving us your thoughts. Thank you again, and we hope to see you at another webinar soon. Thanks everyone.